Hello, Daniel.
Oh, hey Tim, how's it going?
Would you like to hear a story?
I mean, sure. Yeah, what's up?
You walk into a bank, and you approach the teller.
Why are you saying it like that?
It's a second-person story, Daniel.
No, don't do that. Why are you doing that? This is a horrible
You
decision that
approach
removes
the
me
teller.
from your story
You
entirely.
pull out a gun.
Stop!
You decide to...
Harrow! That mic's not in place. Damn it. Harrow the Ninth. The sequel to Gideon the Ninth, which I was a big fan of. Gideon the Ninth was a very refreshing take on what sci-fi fantasy could be. This lesbian necromancy empire in space is fresh and new in all the right ways. And the fact that that story was delivered through the punk, bold, angry eyes of Gideon was just the perfect combination. Like, I think Gideon the Ninth, well, it's not a perfect book, it's one that stands out in the crowded field without question because Tamsyn Muir, the author, just went 100% balls to the wall for the vision she wanted and executed it extremely well. And I still commend Gideon the Ninth to this day for that reason. But Harrow the Ninth I was a bit concerned for because I don't want to get into spoilers for Gideon, but we know for sure this is going to be a reframed look into this world. And by God, this absolutely was. Harrow the Ninth, where we originally experienced this world through these punk, rebellious, personality-filled eyes, we are now following Harrow. And this is a entirely different interpretation of the world around us, not only because the humor is toned down from like a 10 to a 1, but because this person is in a mental state that makes this book confusing and jarring as hell. I pretty consistently see from just about everyone who read this book, they aren't sure what happened for a large chunk of it. This is a confusing and chaotic story that's following up what was before, very straightforward, but that works. It works extremely well. In fact, I think the author did this intentionally. She chose to write in second person, which I want to get across very clearly. I hate that choice. It's my least favorite way to be told a story, but it is serving a purpose here in a similar way that Broken Earth does it in a way that's serving a purpose. It's doing the same thing here, so I can forgive it. I don't like it. Whatever, moving on. I think a lot of people are going to have a really hard time with the first 60% of this book because it does have this reframing. It almost feels like an entirely new world. You're getting to know a character who we've previously known, but in an all new, more intimate way. And there's so many little Easter eggs you need to pick up on and pay extra close attention while simultaneously being confused because this person's mind has been altered drastically. But that final chunk of the book really makes a lot of what you have to get through make sense. There's no other way this story could have been told in the way you want it. After putting down this book, I thought, okay, yes, this was difficult, but it's one of these things where it's all the more satisfying as a result because of the difficulties you went through. And now that everything kind of snaps into place, you get to have this, for so much. I will go ahead and say there's going to be people who just don't vibe with the first 2/3 or however much of it is of this book before this kind of snap happens, and they'll probably end up having more negative reviews. I totally understand them. I'm not invalidating their opinions. It just really worked for me, and I like seeing a creative decision around a structure for the book like this that ends up enhancing the actual narrative. For me, it just pays off well, and I can see how for many it won't, but I dig it. And to make up for our disagreement, here's my cat. He's currently kneading my stomach. There's a fairly obvious thing I'm not going to get into because it is still a spoiler for the people who won't pick up on it, but like 10% of this book, you're going to be going like, oh, this is going to happen. But the fact that it still does kind of go down a way you think doesn't actually take away from the sweet, satisfying resolution of this story. So overall, I actually really like that this author had such a personality-filled, strong, bold first story, and then for the second one does a flip and brings in this outside-the-box, unorthodox retake on this world, entirely reframing it, while simultaneously making it like borderline unreliable narrator, and then has this snap conclusion that makes the payoff of these interesting, different choices really work. Like, this takes courage as an author, to have a first book that works so well and is so strongly received by its audience for these creative choices you made, to then push away a lot of those creative choices and bring in a new way to experience this world for your two. So no, this does not suffer from the sequel syndrome where it's like not as good as the first. I would say it's actually kind of going tit for tat, though it is a very different story, and I could see some fans who really like a lot of the things that were done away with from the first book being a bit disappointed by this one, but the raw creativity of the execution of this story kind of has to be appreciated. So that's all I want to say about the story. It's a lot. There's quite a bit to unpackage there. But let's go ahead and transition to the more technical aspects here. Tamsyn Muir character work continues to impress me. Before, Gideon was such a dominating presence that if you didn't pay close attention, you could kind of just forget a lot of the other characters prevalent in the page. But really, it was a solid cast throughout the first book, and I continue to think so here. While we are following Harrow here closer, I had a trouble really connecting with her because of the narrative choice where we're following her in second person, and she's just not as bold as Gideon is. She's not as to the forefront, and so you will have to do that bigger reach as a reader to have that connection with this character because of a technical reason and a just who this character is reason. But I think that's made up for a bit by having a more well-realized cast around the character we're following. I feel like more energy was put into kind of fleshing out everyone around, fleshing out necromancy. I don't know why, but there's a joke there. I can't think of it. I'll think of it eventually. So I think it's on average as solid, though you're not going to get another Gideon right now because Gideon is Gideon, and she's one of the strongest characters I've read this year, if not the strongest, in terms of just personality. The pacing here is chaos because, again, I had a hard time keeping track of all the events. I probably understood 75% of this book, and then there's just a 25% chunk where you're just, and that's kind of intentional, I believe. And it's something I consistently see in review after review after review. Usually before I review a book, I want to go through and see what the general consensus is, see if there's anything that people think I'm kind of wrong on, so I can maybe go reread a little bit, see if I am wrong. Usually I end up sticking to my opinion, but I like to get both sides of stuff. Here, it seems to be unanimous that this is a hard to follow story for a while. And I think part of that is because a lot of people are not used to reading second person. It's difficult and just has this gap. And we are in a character's mind, as I said, who is not 100% sure on the events that led up to where she is or what's going on around her, and she's kind of scrambling throughout, and that comes together for the pacing to be equivalent of like running on a treadmill that randomly changes its speeds, and it can feel like that, where you're just dying, and then, okay, we're on a nice little stroll now. It never stops, though. I do want to say the treadmill never hits zero. It's very much so a never a I really need to stop using sound effects in my reviews. The tone might be the biggest jarring change from the first book, and that's saying something with everything else I've talked about being different. It is the tone which was most jarring for me above all else, because again, we were experiencing this world through Gideon's eyes, and now we are not even getting eyes to look through. We are being sat in front of the character we're following and following them in second person. It's darker. We don't have this personality of Gideon to provide like a shield for a lot of the more disturbing aspects of the society, and instead it's like I almost want to feel like I was in the swaddling of Gideon before, where she could soften the blows of everything that was horrific around us because she was so funny. Her coping mechanisms were humor, and that really provided this shield. That is gone now. We have been stripped of the blanket and are just exposed to the realities of this empire and society. It works. It works so well. Like, there's a lot here that on paper sounds like it's a risk and you could lose an audience by doing it, but the author consistently comes up to bat and does not strike out. And this kind of bleeds nice naturally into my second point here. We're talking about the world. We are being shown the same world again, but through a new lens, something I've rarely seen in fantasy. And that execution, I think, really makes this a nice experiment in, if you're a reader who's been curious of how framing really matters, and something I've hit on before in previous reviews, how important it can be how an author presents you a world. Like, you want to see how two different people can experience a world in literature, and how as an author you really need to take that into account for every character you write. Bam. And then we have plot. Again, I would say for the first 60% of this, I felt way more negative than I ended up being. I see this has really high scores on its reviews, and I agree that in terms of its execution concept, it worked. But I think a lot of people who end up DNFing will have extremely sour opinions here, because this is one where you need to reach the end to understand why you sat through what you sat through. There could have been a bit more hand-holding for the audience to make sure people don't feel as lost or as chaotic, but then you wouldn't have had the same level of catharsis and oh shite words I get demonetized for at the end. So I'm kind of chalking that up to, nah, sorry, tough tomatoes, you aren't going to finish the book. You don't get to be in the conversation. So too bad. I support authors doing stuff that is unorthodox, so I am happy this ended up being as much as it did, not the traditional plot structure and delivery of story that we are used to. I'm kind of tired of what feels like half measures, where, you know, an author will want to do something, but they feel the need to explain things for like everyone who comes along the journey. They don't want to leave anyone behind, and that can end up harming a story. There is no debate here that this story is going as extreme as it wants to. There are no half measures. The magic system is the magic system we've been exposed to. It's more explored in this book, and specifically the lore around it, the grander vision of the things that are building up to the technical aspects we saw in the previous book, and being in Harrow's head, so now we are more directly connected to it, as before we were only with Gideon. There's definitely more understanding through this story. But overall, I think this is not the sequel I expected for Gideon the Ninth, and it's certainly one that people who DNF or skim read are going to be bothered by, but I cannot see how someone who thoroughly reads both books can't at least appreciate what's being done, because it's pretty damn impressive. And so my criticisms are clear here, right? The communication, it's not the clearest. It serves a purpose, but there's going to be people who are confused and lost. I like that it's done this way, but I'm still going to acknowledge there are people who are going to say, no, my taste is it's still not worth it, and I can recognize that. The pacing is jarring, and from a purely technical standpoint, I don't like as many adjectives as the author has chosen to use in their prose style. The way I'm going to put it is Harrow the Ninth and Gideon the Ninth both kind of read like the fantasy equivalent of a muddy, dirty barroom brawl. Very well done. And if that sounds enticing to you, go ahead and check this one out. But if that sounds like it might be a little bit too messy, you know, stick to other more traditional stuff, and that's absolutely okay. It's just cool to see someone who's willing to step out of line. But hey, that's all right, and that's entirely a subjective opinion. Overall, I'm just impressed. Harrow the Ninth comes out hard and swinging. I need to try and get over my extreme bias against second person, but boy, did it still bother me here. Overall, for Harrow the Ninth, though, I'm feeling a strong 8 out of 10. This was bold. It was definitely no half measures, and I'm looking for that nonstop. For the people who are constantly saying, like, fantasy doesn't break its patterns, pick up Gideon, pick up Harrow. You're wrong. Anyway, guys, let me know what you thought of Harrow the Ninth in the comments down below. Like and subscribe if you have not already. And hit the Patreon if you want to support what I do here. Have a good one, y'all. Peace. And of course, I'd like to record a special shout out to my latest high tier Patreon, Catalytic Potato. I hope you're having a great day. See ya.